Ho ho holidays, everyone. Hey, it's December, so happy Christmas, Merry Hanukkah, a jolly Festivus, or whatever it is with you. I personally am kind of beyond all of it, but we're going to talk about one of the most festive books ever written today. That's right, we're talking about Songs of a Dead Dreamer by Thomas Ligotti, here for the Nicholas Holiday Special. So get ready, we're about to dive into one of the most merry, bright, festive books imaginable, and it's going to be a great time. Oh no, you've come for me. Alright, so today we're talking about Songs of a Dead Dreamer by Thomas Ligotti. This volume contains both Songs of a Dead Dreamer and Grimscribe, which is a little bit shorter. I haven't gotten around to Grimscribe yet because I checked this out from the library, and for whatever reason the Denver Public Library doesn't have a copy of this in their system, so they had to get it checked out from the Prospector system, and you can check those books out way shorter, so I'm going to have to part, I guess, and then maybe I'll check it out again and read Grimscribe. This is Songs of a Dead Dreamer here, this is Grimscribe. I kind of just wanted Songs of a Dead Dreamer, but I guess it's nice that they're both together in the same jolly little collection here. This is a book that I have wanted to read for quite some time. I've always put Thomas Ligotti on the back burner, but I've always thought, yeah, I want to get around to reading Thomas Ligotti. I am really glad that I finally took the initiative, and of my own volition, I went and checked this out from the Denver Public Library. Or maybe I was just on puppet strings the whole time, right? Or maybe free will is an illusion, and the human experience is meaningless, as Thomas Ligotti posits. That's the general conceit of Thomas Ligotti from everything I've heard about and understand about in regards to him, and he has his philosophical treatise, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, that goes more in depth as to his nihilistic views, or I guess some people don't term them nihilistic, some merely term them pessimistic. But just reading these stories alone, I would say you get a good enough idea of exactly how Thomas Ligotti feels about the world, just how fucked up it is. It's really, really insightful. He doesn't need to spell it out for you. I actually think you might ingest Thomas Ligotti's ideas more effectively through short stories and fiction than you might through a treatise where he just kind of spells it out. It's more effectively delivered through allegory and through metaphor and the like. I feel like this is probably one of the most effective, meaningful, impactful, any kind of buzzword you can think of, horror works of the modern era, by which I mean, post-1950s. So we got several figures of this era who made an impact, obviously. We got Stephen King. Now, Stephen King, everyone says, is the big populist. I don't necessarily apply such a cynical view to Stephen King. I've reviewed a lot of his work, and I like a lot of it, and I get why it resonates with so many people, and I get why someone like Thomas Ligotti would not resonate with as many people as Stephen King, because Thomas Ligotti is not easy to brand. It's not easy to go, wow, here's the Troubles of Dr. Thoss movie. This is going to be big shit. In the same way that you can take Pennywise as a concept. You can take It, and you can go, here's the It movie. This is going to be a big cultural sensation, and Muschietti directs, Warner Brothers produces. As for Thomas Ligotti's work, I think the only official adaptation is the song I Have a Special Plan for This World that was made by that one band that's just like an audio recording of I Have a Special Plan for This World. And that's about it. There isn't too much in the way of, Ligotti fan films or Ligotti official films or anything like that. I mean, I'm sure there's some fan work out there that I have yet to get into, but it's not really marketable in the same way a blockbuster bestseller like Stephen King is going to be. And then, of course, you have figures like Clive Barker. who I've never really gotten much into. I really do like Candyman as a concept. I think it's interesting. But like Hellraiser, with Pinhead obviously, while I do really love the practical effects and the stop motion in those movies, and I think it's awesome. I mean, the Cenobites look cool. I can't really relate, as an asexual, to the concept of this guy that's like, taste the pleasure and feel the pain. And that's how Pinhead is, obviously. I can't really understand that because I find BDSM to be juvenile and meaningless. When I see Clive Barker's interests manifested on the screen like that, or in literary form, again, I've just seen Hellraiser 1 and 2, and nothing after that because I think the series went to shit. I can't really resonate with it any. It doesn't do anything for me. I can't really identify with it. Thomas Ligotti, on the other hand, holy shit. I get this book completely. I love this book. This was a treat to dip into. This was a pure delight, start to finish. I was having a great time, and I was fully immersed in everything that Thomas Ligotti paints. I think I might be a little closer to Thomas Ligotti's position than the average person. I would say that if you are the average person, these stories will have a serious, scary impact on you. Like, these will keep you up at night. They don't keep me up at night because I've kind of confronted the ideas contained herein. I don't necessarily agree with everything in Ligotti's philosophy, but I do think he makes several excellent points throughout the course of this work that should be considered and pondered over. You should really let them mull in your head for a good long while. Obviously, Thomas Ligotti is most often considered a weird fiction author, like H.P. Lovecraft. And I have already made a whole video about H.P. Lovecraft and exactly what I think of the little twerp, but suffice to say, when I picked up H.P. Lovecraft's story collection, which I think was this massive tome that contained every single short story by him, I was seriously underwhelmed. I started the book out thinking, this is kind of cool, but then I got to the one where his cat is named the N-word, and I'm like, this guy is just lame. And I don't get why people still pretend like Lovecraft is like this awe-inspiring, spooky figure, because he's really not. I get it, it's the kind of gateway entry point into weird fiction that you would have when you're like 13, but that shouldn't be the entry point. Thomas Ligotti should be the entry point, or you should start with Edgar Allan Poe, who actually invented weird fiction. Then you should go to William Hope Hodgson's The Nightland, or Robert W. Chambers' The King in Yellow, both of which predate Lovecraft. I don't see why, within weird fiction, Lovecraft is given all the credit for shit he didn't come up with and had really no part in creating, other than just, I guess, mass marketing it to a really gullible audience. Whereas tomes like The Nightlands or The King in Yellow, both of which I've read and both of which I absolutely fucking love, go completely unrecognized, obscure, unappreciated. I fucking love The King in Yellow. It was great. I read it before Thomas Ligotti, actually, and I got a good appreciation of weird fiction. And it's like, here's where these ideas come from. They actually predate Lovecraft. Some of the ideas in The King in Yellow, especially in The Repair of Reputations, are really interesting. Like the euthanasia booth, that's a real thing today. Like Robert W. Chambers actually predicted that. It's a great example of near future storytelling that says, you know, something's kind of off about the world we're living in, where you're just permitted to go into a euthanasia booth and do away with yourself. I do think that's kind of fucked up. Even as someone who enjoys pessimistic, nihilistic shit like Thomas Ligotti, there's something deeply disturbing about a world where euthanasia booths are just all over. And today in Canada, at least, they are. And that's kind of, it just tingly, you know? The King in Yellow spooked me out in a way that H.P. Lovecraft just fucking couldn't. For whatever reason, I just don't get what it is with H.P. Lovecraft. I mentioned how I was reading Thomas Ligotti to someone I know who consumes a variety of art, and she said, I've never heard of Thomas Ligotti. And I said, well, he's a weird fiction author. And she was like, oh, weird fiction? You mean Lovecraftian fiction? And I said, well, no, Lovecraftian fiction isn't really a thing. Like, if something directly references the Cthulhu mythos, then it can be considered Lovecraftian. But other than that, weird fiction as a genre which was invented by Edgar Allan Poe and predates Lovecraft by nearly 100 years. There are much better authors in it, like Robert W. Chambers. And then she said, well, I've never heard of Robert W. Chambers, so there's no such thing as Chambersian fiction. This is, I think, the best way to describe Lovecraft. He's the bargain bin, generic-ass wonder bread of the weird fiction world. He's a basic little bitch. He's like the amusement park ride of weird fiction. He's for people who don't really want to immerse themselves in weird fiction. They just want to come off as edgy and cool. Wow, do you know who Cthulhu is? Holy shit, it's Cthulhu. Wow. But he's not that fucking deep. I think what this person I know said really gives away the goat as to the problem with weird fiction. The reason weird fiction isn't more popular is because we're using this fucko as the poster child of it. Like, of course, if you make Lovecraft the main character and he's like the face of your genre, it's not going to be popular because nothing about Lovecraft tends towards like mainstream popularity, except in the most shallow, basic sense. Like, you put Lovecraft up, oh wow, it's Lovecraft, but do you really know anything about the guy? And people avoid knowing things about the guy. They're like, I just want to enjoy the art. I don't want to think about what a shit he was, and just like what a fucking cringe-word this guy was. He was just like Caucasian Wonder Bread all the way. Just like a total fucking stale milquetoast bastard. The problem with Lovecraft's fiction is that he is unable to confront or reconcile with the darker parts of his psyche, which is the purpose of horror. He just says, hey, here's Cthulhu, and then his protagonist, who's always some kind of white coward, just runs away. Oh no, Cthulhu, I better avoid that. Let me get out of here. Instead of just falling into it, you know, embracing the madness, right? And this is the problem with H.P. Lovecraft, is he lacks self-awareness and depth completely. All of his work is the most shallow interpretation of something scary, because I think on a basic level, he was probably incapable of experiencing legitimate existential terror. I don't think he was smart enough to do that, actually. Existential terror, if you felt it, is a really striking phenomena. And it's not only unpleasant, it's also kind of euphoric. You kind of feel a basic euphoria when you experience true, legitimate existential terror, which is the kind of thing I felt when I tried cannabis. It's not fun, but there's something about it. Like, it does leave an impression on you. I get the feel from reading Lovecraft that he probably never felt that once in his boring, dry-ass cracker life. Anyway, I have the cracker pass because I'm white, so I can call out fellow members of my race who just, like, fucking suck, like Lovecraft. This guy fucking sucks. And I don't get why people who want to be fans of weird horror just play the Lovecraft board game and buy the Cthulhu stuffed animal, probably go to Lovecraft land and ride the Lovecraft coaster. I don't get why we're all slurping down this guy's shit when there's way cooler entries in the weird fiction genre that better exemplify the genre. And they just go totally overlooked. It's fucking bizarre. It's not like this is a problem in any other genre. I guess with fantasy, like, Tolkien is more attention than anyone else, but that's because, like, he's good at what he does, and he wasn't a fucking piece of shit, you know, from everything we know. Like, why do we continue to prop Lovecraft up when a figure like Tolkien, you know, he actually innovates? Like, there's nothing like Lord of the Rings before Lord of the Rings, but there's so much shit like Lovecraft that predates Lovecraft that's better than Lovecraft. The Nightlands is better than fucking The Electric Executioner any fucking day of the week. And I just don't get why we continue to prop up Lovecraft. It's fucking bizarre. Like, of course, no one wants to read this shit. One of the funniest things that Lovecraft ever wrote is the poem Providence in 2000 AD. And it's not funny on purpose at all. It's funny because of how fucking dated it is. It's so hack. It's just like, oh no, in the year 2000, there are going to be Swedish people in Rhode Island. Oh no, what am I going to do? And this is what Lovecraft considered scary. Are we really going to consider this guy the master of terror or whatever the fuck if he thinks like, oh no, there's fucking Swedish and Irish immigrants in my New England town. Oh damn, it should only be English people here in the New England town. We take this guy seriously. Like, this is something that to a modern reader is not scary at all, because we've had centuries of integration. In fact, during Lovecraft's time, American cities were already well integrated. There were already plenty of Irish and Italian and Polish and Swedish and, whoever there, and he just couldn't fucking deal with it, I guess. He's like a little bitch baby. I don't get why we prop this guy up at all. This poem is like the perfect example of something that Lovecraft, I'm sure, thought was like the ultimate horror. Like, oh my fuck, there's going to be Swedish people in my town. Damn it. Oh, these fucking it's not just Swedes. I'm just pointing that, he shits on black people too in that. But it's like, this is not scary to the modern reader because it's just fucking normal. Like, just grow up, Lovecraft. Just fucking deal. Like, this isn't scary at all. I mean, I guess if you're like a huge racist, it might provoke a little bit of fear. But to anyone else in the modern day, in 2025, Lovecraft is dated as fuck. His work is not timeless. It's of its time. It's the most 1900s ass backwater mindset possible. And really, I do regard like an upper class privileged ass New England, college grad like him as basically as closed off and sheltered from the world as like an Appalachian hillbilly, Ultimately, it's about the same. We just give Lovecraft the props because it's like, oh, he was in a New England town and not in, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre shack with Leatherface and the fucking wrinkled up grandpa. But ultimately, like, it's a manifestation of the exact same thing. It's white privilege going too sheltered, and oh no, there's Swedes showing up in my town. Okay, Lovecraft dunking over. That's just an example of why I think, like, we shouldn't prop Lovecraft up. Like, seriously. And as a leading figure, I think, in modern horror, like, I've written some good horror stories that I think people like. Just forget about Lovecraft. Just it's stupid. People generally prop Lovecraft up and they say, well, his work is actually scary. He was actually a tortured soul because he was a misanthrope and he didn't like other races or women, and this is supposed to be like scary. But if you read something like Thomas Ligotti here, and it mentions in the introduction that Thomas Ligotti was influenced by H.P. Lovecraft and Kafka and Poe. The Edgar Allan Poe influence comes through in quite a few of these stories. But he's influenced by H.P. Lovecraft too, and he doesn't hide that. But the introduction, which is by Jeff Vandermeer, the author of Annihilation, which I haven't read, I might someday, it says that Ligotti effectively consumed Lovecraft and then was able to, like, push him out, like digest him, take what was interesting about it, and then excrete him. I personally wouldn't take that approach. Lovecraft isn't even worth a shit, but the introduction makes clear the distinction that Thomas Ligotti is a noteworthy and respectable figure on his own terms, by his own merit, separate from Lovecraft or anything like that. A lot of the stories in here show a much deeper Franz Kafka influence than they do H.P. Lovecraft. And I think the assortment, the diverse blend of the influences that Ligotti is drawing from, really come forward to make something special. I think that if a story reminds you more of Thomas Ligotti than of H.P. Lovecraft, you should say it's Ligottian, because really, there are some signifiers and motifs that only Thomas Ligotti uses that writers before him didn't really. Like, for instance, in this book, there is constant references to puppets. That's, as far as I can tell, a purely Ligotti thing. And it ties in to his belief that human beings don't have free will, that we're all just a bunch of marionettes on strings, or mannequins, or dummies, or they assume different forms in the book. They're on the cover too, with this little delightful abomination here. But you get the idea. That's purely a Ligotti thing, is the puppets. Like, he comes up with that, and he works it into quite a few of the stories in here. and it's very effective in conveying the notion of just these sleepwalkers in the dream world. There's a lot of references to somnambulism too. So like you're sleepwalking through life. You know, you get it. It's all about pessimism and nihilism. Not misanthropy per se, like Lovecraft gave into, where he's just like, oh no, it's fucking Hindu god. Oh, this scares me. Is a white bread cracker carton bastard, right? That's stupid. Whereas Ligotti's view, his take is more like alienation, which, you know, isn't specific to any one particular race or place or anything. It's like a universal human phenomena that we can all relate to. Like anyone can relate to alienation because it's like everyone feels it. There are people in African tribes and, you know, Aboriginal cultures, I'm sure, who at one point have felt like, oh, I don't relate to my peers, you know? That's just like a universal human thing. One thing that's pointed out in the foreword is the non-specificity or non-specificity of these stories, and how the names aren't often given or the town isn't named. So unlike an H.P. Lovecraft story where it's always very clearly set in New England, you know, just some New England town, Arkham or fucking Innsmouth or wherever. With these, it's like the town isn't named, the character isn't named. Actually, there are some instances where the character is named, like Albindes, for instance. Albindes is a weird name. That could be anyone. Like, if there was an adaptation of The Troubles of Dr. Thoss, and I maintain that Dr. Thoss is a scarier character than anything in the Cthulhu mythos. The idea that he talks in this electronic buzzing voice is just fantastic. I feel like I'm listening to Giagotti by Boards of Canada, and that part where it's like the really spooky song with the, you know, electric buzzy voice, Devil is in the Details or whatever. And I feel like I'm listening to that when I read Dr. Thoss's dialogue, and it's like, wow, you know. Because Giagotti's legitimately fucking creepy too, some points on that. And so when I'm able to make the connection, like, this is probably what Dr. Thoss sounds like, I'm like, wow. This here is a damn good character that Thomas Ligotti's cooked up. Not fucking Nyarlathotep or whatever. I'm talking Dr. fucking Thoss. This is the shit right here. Anyway, my point is that with Albindes, right, you could make an adaptation of The Troubles of Dr. Thoss, which I know I joked about probably isn't going to happen anytime soon, because big studios aren't willing to take a gamble on legitimately interesting work like this. But you could make an adaptation of The Troubles of Dr. Thoss where Albindes is black, or Albindes is Asian, or Indian, or, you know, whatever. I feel like that's not something that can be done with H.P. Lovecraft, because his work is just so confined to the same little New England-ass privileged shack where he sips his tea. And the other thing I find insufferable about H.P. Lovecraft, I know I said I moved on from him, but this is like the most insufferable bit, is even though he's a fucking American, he spells all his words with U. Like, if you read his stories, he'll spell, like, color. You know, it's not the color out of space, it's the color out of space, because I'm distinguished, or whatever the fuck. So it's nice to see an American author not using U's and calling shit car parks and stuff just because they want to be considered British, because they think that's more, like, civilized or whatever. It's nice to see an American horror author that just embraces being American. Some of these stories do feel very American, but others of them are very out there, non-specific. They could happen at any point in time, and they're just like super obscure and vague. And I do really like that. I like anachronistic settings that could be any point in time. I've said before, that's one of my favorite things when something does that, and these stories strike that chord, or the ones that try for that specifically anyway. The book opens up with the section of Dreams for Sleepwalkers. This is my least favorite section. When I first started reading, I thought, oh, if this is all the range Ligotti has, because all of these stories were written in this kind of very modern vernacular. They make a lot of references to, like, contemporary stuff, like Guys and Dolls. I know that's not contemporary, it's like 70-year-old musical, but still, it shows that, like, there's points in time and there's familiar pop culture references. In The Frolic, which is considered by a lot of people to be one of the most iconic stories, and for good reason, it's a good story in its own right, but there's a reference to Bambi, right? And the characters has this Bambi toy, and it's like, this is obviously set after the 1940s. And so it just feels more connected generally to our world, whereas a story that comes up later in the collection, like The Greater Festival of Masks, is very clearly set in some kind of fucked up place that defies comprehension. So when it started out with Dreams for Sleepwalkers, which feels pretty familiar, Dream of a Mannequin is kind of like the Twilight Zone episode with Anne Francis, The 13th Floor, with its own twist. It doesn't feel specifically like a ripoff or anything, but it wasn't like doing it for me. My least favorite was Alice's Last Adventure, because Thomas Ligotti is trying to write from like a female perspective, and it just doesn't come off as convincing at all. It is pretty boring. And then there's the Nyctalops trilogy, which is pretty good, all things considered, given the general tone of this section. I liked Eye of the Lynx a lot. I thought Eye of the Lynx was fucking hilarious as an asexual, because it's basically about, I won't spoil it, but it's about a BDSM dungeon that gets, the script flips on it. It gets totally messed up, like the ritual is disturbed in a way. So I thought that was very funny. That's the kind of thing that like Clive Barker wouldn't write, because it's much more self-aware about the tedium and banality, ultimately, of BDSM. So I thought Eye of the Lynx was pretty funny. But my favorite of the Nyctalops trilogy, actually my favorite from this entire section, was Drink to Me Only with Labyrinthine Eyes. The influence from the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is very clear, but it takes a whole new twist that's like super fun. And out of the entire section, this is the one that felt the least like some kind of modern pastiche. I also felt like there was a bit too much quippiness in this section. Like, I get that that's a factor of Thomas Ligotti's work, and even some of the stories later on have kind of this dark humor about them, because obviously when you're dealing with subject matter as unpleasant as Ligotti tends to go into, you want a little jokiness to counterbalance that. But I felt like some of the stories, like especially Alice's Last Adventure, were just way too full of just like jokes and shit to spook me. When I started reading this, I thought all the stories were going to be like this, so I was like, okay, yeah, this isn't so great as I've been led to believe. But the contrast between this section, this initial section that you have to get through, and the stuff that comes later on, I think it makes you appreciate the stuff that comes later on more, and appreciate the range that Thomas Ligotti is capable of. You go in thinking he doesn't have any range, and then once you hit Dreams for Insomniacs, the second section, it's a little switcheroo, and you're like, oh, Thomas Ligotti is actually about to take us on a voyage down the river Styx. Fuck yeah. So, the second section, Dreams for Insomniacs, starts out with the Christmas Eves of Aunt Elise, which kind of eases you in and makes you feel sort of comfortable. I should add, these stories are excellently ordered, just like for maximum impact, so if you read them all in one go, you will be amazed. I read all of it in about, I think, like 2 weeks. It took me about 2 weeks to finish Songs of a Dead Dreamer in its entirety. I will get to Grimscribe eventually. After the Christmas Eves of Aunt Elise, you get The Lost Art of Twilight, which I think is the first really spectacular, incredible story in here, and has a ton of substance, and pretty much every story from then on out is an absolute banger that is going to leave you with so many questions and also so many answers. You'll be like, wow, this shit's phenomenal. So The Lost Art of Twilight is a story that is really different in terms of vampire fiction. I absolutely found this one enthralling, because all too often, and I fucking hate this cliche, in the Twilight series, for instance, where vampires are all sexy, I've talked about this in my Nosferatu review. I hate sexy vampires. They should not be hot. Vampires are undead cadavers that come out and they suck your blood. Nothing hot about that. Not to like a well-adjusted person. So Thomas Ligotti here paints like the most grotesque, unpleasant picture of being bitten by a vampire. And I won't spoil too much beyond that, but he doesn't make it sound hot in the least. You would actually have to be more disturbed than Thomas Ligotti psychologically to imagine anything that goes on in this story as remotely fucking hot, because these vampires aren't hot. So that's excellent. This is a great vampire story. It's very, very good. The Lost Art of Twilight, not to be confused with Twilight, of course. After that, we get my favorite of the Dreams for Insomniacs section. Actually, hell, I'm gonna say it, maybe my favorite of the whole collection. I've said it, The Troubles of Dr. Thoss. This thing perfectly captures what insomnia feels like. I used to be a lot more of an insomniac. I've been going to sleep earlier and earlier lately, but this one is excellent. It really does capture how insomnia feels, and you're just kind of vague and confused and half there. I said, Al Bindes is a very nondescript sort of protagonist, but yeah, I relate to him. I feel bad for him when Dr. Thoss sinks the hooks in. Aw, damn, poor Al, stayed up too late. Dr. Thoss, fantastic fucking character. I love The Troubles of Dr. Thoss. This shit was awesome. After that, we got Masquerade of a Dead Sword, a tragedy, spelled Tragedie. This is the big Edgar Allan Poe homage, and as someone who fucking loves Edgar Allan Poe, I love all those stories, except The Raven, which I think is hella overrated, and it's way too romantic for my taste, obviously. Way too mushy. I really love this story. It's clear Thomas Ligotti has a great deal of respect and admiration for Poe, and this is most clearly a reference to both The Cask of Amontillado, because the characters dress up as a jester, and Mask of the Red Death, more overtly because it's at a masquerade. But even though it's a very clear homage to the Poe-type style, which takes place, at Carnival or something, besides Edgar Allan Poe's American-type stories, obviously, which are obviously, set in America. But then there's this fantastic, Carnival atmosphere that's, all Italian and shit, and it's like, wow, we're at Carnival. I think it's awesome that that's worked its way into Gothic fiction. So this is less of a weird horror story and more of a Gothic horror story with, some tragic elements. It's trying to be all Shakespearean and dramatic. And for a modern author, holy shit, Thomas Ligotti totally succeeds in this end. Not only does this story capture everything that makes stories like Mask of the Red Death so special, but it takes those and kind of flips them on their head and messes them around a little bit so that they feel totally brand new and fresh. And honestly, if this story was stuffed into an Edgar Allan Poe compilation and it was this is an Edgar Allan Poe story, I might actually believe it. That's just how good Thomas Ligotti is at capturing what makes an Edgar Allan Poe style story so special. And it's very clear he has a lot of respect for the master in that regard. So I really like that. Instead of just the average edgelord that reads an HP story and is like, I'm Lovecraft now, I'm the new Lovecraft, I can write just like him, let me write a Cthulhu tale. Thomas Ligotti, he writes from all sorts of different perspectives and doesn't give any one of them any more weight above the rest. But Masquerade of a Dead Sword, a tragedy, or the tragedie, is excellent. This is everything I could possibly ask for from an old-style Gothic fiction tale. There's the betrayal, there's the spectacle, all of it is there, and it's beautiful. I feel like I'm revisiting a beautiful old place that's just been shut off, and suddenly it's open again, it's open for business, and I want to get to that fucking carnival and revel in the feast. Masquerade of a Dead Sword, a Tragedy is truly a masterpiece, and I think it's a great example of how to take obvious inspiration from something while still doing your own thing, and doing it so fucking well. It's not like fantasy where, I did the review of Eye of the World recently, where it feels like it's derivative, and it feels like it's taking too many elements from what it's deriving from, and doesn't do enough on its own. Masquerade of a Dead Sword just feels like a different story that someone like Edgar Allan Poe would have written. All the language is totally period accurate, and it's just beautiful. It's a fantastic fucking story. I really, really like it. After that, we go on to Dr. Voke and Mr. Veach. I actually flipped ahead to this story when I first got this book out of the library and kind of peered into this one, and I was amazed. And then once I actually got to it proper after reading everything that preceded it, I was even more impressed. This story is inspired by German Expressionism, obviously, and it takes a ton of cues from Nosferatu, the original, having of Dr. Caligari and a lot of that type deal. And there's also the fun character of the Ticket Man. I won't spoil anything about the Ticket Man, but he's fun because basically the idea with him is he's just about, human existence. How Thomas Ligotti thinks about human existence. Beautiful. This story is super dreamlike and very vague and is weird all around, and I fucking love it. And obviously it's kind of aware that it's playing off these archetypes of like the mad scientist and the guy that wants the bargain from the mad scientist. But it totally does its own thing, and it's awesome. I enjoyed Dr. Voke and Mr. Veach immensely. Obviously the title is maybe a reference to like, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that type title. Then we got the closer of Professor Nobody's Little Lectures on Supernatural Horror, which feels a lot like the closer of the first section, Dreams for Sleepwalkers, which was Notes on the Writing of Horror, a Story, which didn't really carry that much of a punch for me. I felt like it was kind of too quippy. Professor Nobody's Little Lectures is a little less quippy, obviously, because we're on to the Dreams for Insomniac section at this point. And it's basically just Thomas Ligotti talking about how he feels about horror and the futility of the human experience and all of this. And so it's basically just like the conspiracy against the human race, but condensed into like 5 pages. So it's pretty decent, and if you want a basic intro to Ligotti's whole take, then I guess this is the place to start. And you can read it, and you'll be like, that's kind of interesting. But in terms of narrative potential, not really. It's a nice little assortment. It's probably just stuff that Ligotti scrawled out once and was like, okay, this should go in here, because it says that when Songs for a Dead Dreamer was first published, there were only 300 copies. I've had comics that have more initial copies than that, and so it's kind of wild to think that the initial printing of a book this great was so limited and scarce, and I'm very glad that it's in the Penguin Classics edition now. And according to the Wikipedia page, this is one of only, I think, 10 books from Penguin Classics that feature the work of a living author. Thomas Ligotti's still alive. He's 72. Anyway, after that, we get to the absolute most demented section, Dreams for the Dead. So unlike The King in Yellow, which starts out with the most screwed up story first and then goes on to the more romantic and light stories later on, Songs of a Dead Dreamer takes the opposite approach, and it starts with the most funny, zany type stories that kind of catch you off guard, and you're like, oh, this is just basic stuff. Thomas Ligotti's a silly guy. And then it plunges into an abyss of Twilight, and beautiful. It's a wonderful bait and switch. He totally caught me off guard there. With Dreams for the Dead, Dr. Locrian's Asylum opens us up. This story is awesome. It feels like a Zdzislaw Belsinski painting. I know that Zdzislaw is talked about all the time. Everyone knows him. Everyone knows his paintings. But when I see those figures there with their wrapped up arms, and their spiderweb limbs and shit, and they always have these very vacant expressions, That's how this story feels. It feels like I'm looking at one of those, with the imagery of the asylum patients that are so messed up that they stop being human. What a fantastic original idea for a monster here that Thomas Ligotti has come up with. I mean, this is some messed up shit, but Dr. Locrian's Asylum is a great example of an asylum story. I know a lot of people love, Arkham Asylum, Serious House on Serious Earth, read Dr. Locrian's Asylum, because I guarantee it's way better than Grant Morrison, okay? This story was fantastic opener to the section. It's super fun. A reference to puppets in this one, too. It actually mentions them twice. So I'm not sure exactly what that's about, but, you know, you gotta process this. It's working on multiple levels. Fantastic story. After this, we get The Sect of the Idiot, which is a direct reference to H.P. Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos, and starts out with a quote from the Necronomicon, which I'm not sure if it's an actual quote from one of Lovecraft's stories, or it's made up by Ligotti. Not sure, because obviously the Necronomicon isn't a real book, because H.P. Lovecraft could not actually write a book that was actually disturbing enough to invoke legitimate fear. Whereas Songs of a Dead Dreamer, I would say this is pretty close to the real-life actual Necronomicon right here. This is a book that screws your mind up. So The Sect of the Idiot is a Lovecraft-type homage, and honestly, it'd be unfair if Ligotti didn't. You know, he paid respect to Edgar Allan Poe earlier, so here he's going for another one. Another obvious type homage that isn't just like pure Ligotti. Because again, there are just things with Ligotti that you just go, that's a Ligotti thing. It's not Lovecraftian, it's not Poean, you know, it's just Ligotti. With The Sect of the Idiot, I have to say, if it's going for the H.P. Lovecraft type feeling, with a story like The Festival of Shadow over Innsmouth, he has out-Lovecrafted Lovecraft, because I have to say, I like this story. This story was good. Not as good as The Troubles of Dr. Thoth, but they are pretty similar, because they both deal with protagonists that happen upon this kind of messed up shit. But I would say that this is a good story and a good example of how to write like Lovecraft, while going further than Lovecraft could even possibly imagine. The Sect of the Idiot is great. It's really fucking spooky. After that, we get maybe my favorite story of this section. Yeah, in terms of the Dreams for the Dead section, I guess my favorite is probably the Greater Festival of Masks. This shit is about yet another festival, but unlike the Italian Carnival in Masquerade of a Dead Sword, which is obviously tied to our own world at least somewhat, this is about a festival that's fucked up beyond measure. I like this story way more than the H.P. Lovecraft story, The Festival, which has a really vague-ass name, and I made a cartoon of it once, which I guess is lost media now, because I actually deleted it, because I was embarrassed I had adapted the work of such a babbling idiot like Lovecraft. I might make a new cartoon adapting this one. Heck, I might actually, because everything that I thought The Festival did when I first read it, and I was like 15 or something, and I was super impressionable, the Greater Festival of Masks does, but like tenfold. Holy shit, this is an unnerving story. This one is fucked up and screwed up and twisted all kinds of ways, but I love it nonetheless. This is just absolute prose gold here. The motif of the mask shows up a little less in Ligotti's work than the motif of the puppet. But I guess the idea with the puppet is like you're on strings and you're at the whim of the world and you have no autonomy. To me, that's a very relatable fear, and I think a very relatable fear for many people. Again, Thomas Ligotti conjures up nightmares that are universally resonant, unlike H.P. Lovecraft, where he's just like, oh no, a Swede, oh damn it, how will I live now? So, whereas the puppet motif is all about the loss of autonomy, I guess the mask motif is about how you can't trust people and they're always duplicitous and furtive, and even they might have subconscious motivations that they're not aware of to a certain extent, and this is totally realized in the Greater Festival of Masks. This shit is absolute nightmare fuel if you read it late at night. Again, these stories don't scare me as much as they might some people, because I've delved into this shit, you know, and I'm very desensitized to it at this point. But if you're into some spooky shit, the Greater Festival of Masks, oh man. I should mention that even though I'm very desensitized to horror because I'm big into it, it's my favorite genre, Actually, maybe sci-fi is my favorite genre, but, you know, they have some overlap. I actually felt a knot in my stomach at basically every single story once it reached its, like, twist or climax or apex, once it reached its worst point. I actually felt like a kind of tightening, a constriction of the muscles, and I was like, wow, this is having a real effect on me. It's beautiful. It's been a long time since any kind of literature actually did that. Made me feel something. It's fucking awesome. So The Greater Festival of Masks is a fantastic story, a very spooky festival story. It's so festive. Then we got The Music of the Moon. This, I guess, is probably my least favorite from the Dreams for the Dead section. It reminds me a lot of the music of Eric Sand from Lovecraft, which I don't remember too well, except that there's some kind of music in it, and it's like spooky music. So this is obviously going for the same type of feel. I would say that it's the weakest of the Dreams for the Dead section. That doesn't mean at all that it's bad, though. It's actually really, really good. I feel like it kind of goes a little too far into exactly like how it works, and I feel like the part where there's the conversation at the end between the guy that heard the music and the guy that didn't hear the music, like that could have been cut. But other than that, it's a fun concept. Just as a musician and someone that goes into like very electronic type realms, I've heard some weird music. I feel like the music that's described in this story, where it's just like a violin or, you know, a tuba or classical type instruments, again, because it's trying to be nondescript and have this gothic kind of environment, I don't know if those are necessarily capable of being as weird as like a, you know, Mellotron or something. But, you know, it's trying to conjure the image of this weird music that's beyond human comprehension and fucks you up and everything. And, you know, maybe it's like, you know, John Cage or something. I don't know. It's an interesting story, even if I can't really hear the music. It doesn't go into much description about the music. But, you know, whatever. They can't all be absolute knock it out of the park home runs. Then it got The Journal of J.P. Drapeau. I'm kind of conflicted on this one, because some of the ideas in it are really interesting. And it feels a lot like Shatter Day by Harlan Ellison, which is a story I really like, about the loss of identity and suddenly you've got a doppelganger running around. On the other hand, I feel like this might be better contained as like a full collection. I don't feel like we're necessarily given enough context. Maybe that's the point, but I feel like if there was a full Journal of J.P. Drapeau, it could maybe expand on the ideas a little bit. And I don't really get much of an impression of what the deal is with J.P. Drapeau. It's just kind of like he's a crazy guy. Okay, it's decent, I suppose, and I kind of get what Ligotti was going for. But, Then we finish off with Vasterion, which I would say is my favorite of the section, except, you know, I already said that about Greater Festival of Masks. And I do feel like the Greater Festival of Masks is the better between the two. But Vasterion is a wonderful way to end this collection that totally leaves you just asking for more. Oh my gosh, it's over already. We've already come to the end of our existential voyage, damn it. That's what this story says. It's about a guy that searches for the most spooky book possible. This is so metafictional, it's so deep. It does everything. Like, people who've read House of Leaves, right? I read when I was like 16, and I was like, okay. I was kind of underwhelmed with it even at that age, because I was like, surely there must be more deep metatextual books than this. Vasterion does, in just a couple pages, what House of Leaves was unable to do in, well, in excess of, 200, and all the appendices and everything. Vasterion is about a guy, and he looks for the book that can spook him to death, just absolutely give him the shocks and scares that he's craving. And, you know, this is relatable, because it's like, I want a book that scares the shit out of me. I want to be frightened beyond measure. And then it ends with him, I will spoil this one actually, spoiler alert, he ends up crazy, and in the asylum, it's like he searched for such a sensation out of literature, such an immersive, wild sensation that did something to his mind, that he was just changed, and he can't recover. And it's like he found what he was looking for. He found all the beauty and wonder of this nightmare realm, which is contained in this book. Vasterion is a lot like the Necronomicon, it's this forbidden text, but it's like explained, actually, as to like the process of going crazy from literature, from reading a bunch. It's like, wow, I relate to this immensely. Thomas Ligotti is writing about a book that drives you crazy and scares the shit out of you while writing a book that could potentially, I think this kind of does have the potential, in a certain sense, in some circumstances, to drive some people crazy and scare the shit out of them. So here he's referencing what he's writing while he's writing it. I learned during the making of this video that Thomas Ligotti suffers from anhedonia, which is defined as a deficit of hedonic activity in the brain, where you intentionally avoid pleasure, or you don't have any interest in pleasure. In some cases, you can't even feel pleasure. It sounds fucking miserable. I've thought maybe I have a little bit of anhedonia. Maybe I'm on the fringe of that. Very possibly. Everyone's like, hey Nick, you're an asexual and you're stupid for that. You don't like sex? It's the most pleasurable thing ever. It's fucking awesome. And I'm like, no. I'd rather read Songs of a Dead Dreamer than have sex any day of the fucking week. I feel like maybe there's some overlap between asexuals and anhedonics, but Thomas Ligotti is anhedonic, and this sounds like a real interesting type condition. I mean, obviously you'd have to have it to write a book like this. You'd have to have some kind of pessimistic, screwed up type sensation. So like Thomas Ligotti actually is, according to the Wikipedia page on him at least, mentally ill, like clinically. He has severe anxiety too. And this makes so much sense. It's way cooler than H.P. Lovecraft, where he's like, yeah, I'm mentally ill because I'm a racist. And it's like, that's not a mental illness. It just means you suck. But Thomas Ligotti, man, I relate to the anhedonia. I get why someone like Thomas Ligotti would write a story like Eye of the Lynx in Dreams for Sleepwalkers, because that's a story that just takes the piss all over the sexual process. And it's like, this shit's fucking stupid. This shit's dumb, right? So I relate to it in a way that, you probably won't. Everyone will have a different experience reading this kind of book, and that's what I love about it, is it's fully immersive. You will have totally different interpretations of it or whatever than I might. And that's great. This is the kind of book that just begs for a reread and to be interpreted and analyzed again and again and again. It's a book of immense depth, and you will be gratified when you read it. The protagonist of Vasterion, he's described actually explicitly at one point as being like bored. And that's because he's a boring person, because he's unable to experience legitimate wonder or exhilaration when he reads literature, because he's like, this is related to our world, this is lame, I want Vasterion. And Thomas Ligotti is probably in a certain way talking about the stories that came earlier in the collection and how they're more modern and related to our world. And he's like, well, you can never actually ask for a book that is completely divorced from all reality, because as a manifestation of the human experience, literature will reflect the human experience. It'll be about human feelings and thoughts and ideas. That's unavoidable. And I have to agree with him. There is no book, unless, it's written by aliens, that doesn't reflect the human experience. We're all prisoners of our own souls. And Vasterion is about that. The search for something outside, the search for something beyond that drives you crazy. But Vasterion says, well, you might actually be crazy, and it's not that fun, and you might go crazy from finding Vasterion, But why can't the protagonist of Festerian just be content with all the lesser books that he goes through, that he just tosses aside without a second thought? Just, oh, this, like, you should appreciate art. And that's such a nice message. It's really, really pretty. Festerian is a wonderful outro to the whole book and a good commentary on the whole book. And after that, I get why he started the book out with some of the less impactful sorts of stories, and then really goes all in with stuff like Festerian. Festerian is a commentary on finding the meaning of experience in everything in art, and you just search for it. You search for meaning. You look for things that impact you. And if you're like a loser and you're like, I don't read horror, that's too disturbing for me, I'm too sensitive for it, nothing will make you happy. You're a boring person, and you'll never find Festerian, you'll never feel anything when you consume art, you'll never respond in shock and awe at the sheer magnitude of the grotesque anomalies before you. But if you can enjoy literature, if you can legitimately love reading, then, Thomas Ligotti's got what it fucking takes. This book left a fucking impact on me, man. This was a wallop. This was a dollop. This was a 1-2 punch straight to the mind, yo. This was where it's at. What am I gonna rate Songs of a Dead Dreamer? Well, even though I don't think the first section, Dreams for Sleepwalkers, is especially strong, it's definitely the weakest of them. I, in hindsight, appreciate what it goes for on its own terms, kind of divorced from the later stuff. And this is a book that I would feel wrong if I gave it anything other than a perfect, immaculate 10 out of 10. This is what you should read if you want a modern horror book. This is what you should read if you want, like, weird fiction. Just forget about Lovecraft. Thomas Ligotti's got it going on, and has exceeded every influence that created him. It's totally out of bounds, and what Thomas Ligotti is able to do, even if he is a total pessimist, nihilist, oh, nothing matters, man, his art fucking matters, and there's a reason that it's so widely acclaimed. I mentioned earlier that I had talked to someone that I was reading Thomas Ligotti, and she was like, I've never heard of Ligotti, and I was like, well, I mean, if you're even moderately a fan of horror, you've probably heard of Thomas Ligotti, at least in passing. Like, he's not Stephen King, but he's not trying to be. It's good that figures like Ligotti are popular, at least among, like, horror fiction circles, like, people know this shit. It's good, and I'm glad this is a Penguin Classics edition. I'm glad it's in such an immaculate form, and yeah. This is, in every sense of the word, a modern classic. It might actually be the best instance of weird fiction I've ever read, because, like, I wouldn't consider something like Stephen King weird fiction. Actually, no. Poe's the best weird fiction. He invented it, and I have to give credit where credit's due. Ted Allan Poe. I do love Poe, but Thomas Ligotti, after Poe, is the master of weird fiction. He's 72, he's still alive, but man, I mean, he'll leave behind such ideas, such wild, squirming vermin things that are just absolutely gripping. I cannot really express how much I love this book. This is a beautiful book, a beautiful little puppet adventure. I had a great time reading it. This is the kind of book that makes me excited to read, and I wish books like this were in the school curriculum. I wish books like this were available through the normal public library system. They didn't have to get it on loan from Fort Lewis College Library. This is a book that should be taught in basic high school. High school children should be reading this book, and college students should also read this book to come to terms with the meaningless cruelty of the world, a confrontation with the id. Unlike Lovecraft, which is just a cowardly run away from the unknown, Ligotti full-on plunges into the unknown, and he says, let's check it the fuck out, and let's see what's going on here, let's confront all this shit, and let's just write it out, and just get fucking twisted. I love it. Anyway, yeah, that's my review of Songs of a Dead Dreamer, one of my new all-time favorite horror books, absolute gold-tier, chef's kiss type sauce right here. Ligotti is goated. Immensely relatable, fun read right here. If you liked this review, then go ahead and subscribe and like down below. And I'm really worried about that shadow at the door. I don't know what that is, but it looks like it's coming in, and it looks like it's pretty goth too.